There was a university student who posted something online that a lot of students quietly related to. She said she studied the entire weekend. Then on Monday morning, her lecturer asked a question from the exact topic she revised, and her brain went completely blank. She just stared at him like she had never seen the topic before in her life. And what made that post hit so hard wasn't that she didn't study. She did. The painful part was that almost everyone in the comments had the exact same experience. Someone said they can only remember their notes when the PDF is open. Another person said they understand everything while reading, but during exams it feels like their brain just deletes itself. And then somebody replied with something that honestly stayed with me. They said, maybe we're not actually studying. Maybe we're just repeatedly exposing ourselves to information. That one sentence bothered me for days, because the more you think about it, the more you realize how accurate it is. A lot of what students call studying is really just exposure. Hours surrounded by information without ever forcing the brain to actually work on its own. And the scary part is that exposure feels productive. You've got a YouTube lecture playing, laptop open, notes highlighted, study playlist in the background. From the outside, it looks serious. But inside the brain, something different is happening. The brain is just becoming familiar with the material instead of actually storing it. And familiarity is dangerous because it creates false confidence. Psychologists actually have a name for this. They call it the illusion of competence. The brain mistakes recognition for mastery. If something looks familiar, the brain assumes it already knows it. That's why students reread the same notes over and over. Every reread feels smoother than the last one, so naturally you think you're getting it. But smoother reading isn't proof of memory. It's just proof that your brain recognizes the material visually. And exams don't test visual familiarity. They test retrieval. Can your brain pull the information out with nothing in front of it? That's why students sometimes get that terrifying exam moment where the question looks familiar, but the answer feels completely trapped somewhere they can't reach. It's not always panic. Sometimes the memory just was never built strongly enough to actually retrieve in the first place. This is exactly where the 3-2-1 method becomes useful. Not because it's trendy, not because some productivity influencer put it in a video, but because it directly attacks that illusion. The method is simple. After studying a topic, you stop looking at the material completely. Then you ask yourself 3 things. What are 3 things I actually remember? What are 2 details or examples connected to what I just recalled? And what is one thing I still don't fully understand? That's it. But what happens in your brain when you do this is actually significant. You get forced into retrieval mode instead of recognition mode. And retrieval is effortful. That effort is the whole point. There's a well-known experiment in cognitive psychology where students were split into 2 groups. One group repeatedly reread their material. The other group spent that same time testing themselves on it. The rereading group actually felt more confident going into the test. But the retrieval group performed better. And that finding shows up again and again in memory research. The brain holds onto information more effectively when it has to struggle to bring it back out. Which is ironic because most students interpret that struggle as a bad sign. The moment recall starts feeling hard, they think they don't know the material and immediately reopen their notes. But that difficulty is often exactly the condition memory needs to get stronger. Scientists call it desirable difficulty. The struggle itself is what improves long-term learning. And this actually explains something a lot of students get wrong about high-performing students. Sometimes it's not that they learn faster, it's just that they practice retrieval more often. While everyone else stays in passive loops, reading, highlighting, watching, rereading, all input, almost no output. The brain becomes like someone who watches gym videos every day, but never actually lifts anything. Lots of exposure, very little real performance. What makes this even harder right now is that students are trying to build focus inside environments specifically designed to destroy it. Short videos, constant notifications, switching between apps every few minutes. Attention becomes fragmented. That's why so many students talk about reading the same sentence multiple times without actually processing it. The brain is just overloaded. The 3-2-1 method works well in this environment because it interrupts the passive consumption cycle. Instead of endlessly absorbing, you pause and ask, what actually survived? That one question changes studying from performance into diagnosis. You can suddenly see your actual weak points clearly. A medical student might realize they remember the definition, but not the process. A law student might notice they understand a case while reading it, but can't explain it independently. A psychology student might discover they remember the theory names, but keep mixing up what they actually mean. Without retrieval practice, those weaknesses stay hidden until an exam exposes them. And that's part of why exams feel so brutal emotionally for a lot of students. Not just because they're hard, but because students discover their understanding was shallow at the worst possible moment. Because here's what happens. You're sitting in the exam hall. You read the question, and your brain says, you've seen this before. But seeing something before is not enough. Memory retrieval needs pathways, and those pathways only get stronger through repeated reconstruction. That's why teachers who make students answer questions without notes are accidentally doing something that's scientifically effective. They're forcing the brain to rebuild the information actively instead of just recognizing it passively. It's also why you can remember embarrassing moments from years ago with perfect clarity, not because you studied them, but because your brain retrieved and replayed them over and over. Retrieval strengthens memory. That principle affects almost everything humans actually remember, which makes modern study culture genuinely strange when you look at it. Students are taught to spend more time consuming information instead of reconstructing it. But memory isn't like downloading a file. It's more like carving a path through a forest. The more you walk that path, the easier it becomes to find. The 3-2-1 method forces you to walk it deliberately. And one thing students don't talk about enough is that a huge part of academic stress isn't just workload. It's uncertainty. You genuinely cannot tell whether you know something or not. You close your notebook at night and suddenly wonder, if the exam came tomorrow, could I actually answer anything? That uncertainty creates anxiety in a specific way that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. The 3-2-1 method answers that question honestly, not optimistically. Honestly. And that honesty matters because false confidence is genuinely expensive as a student. A student who thinks they understand something stops revising too early. A student who practices retrieval notices the gaps immediately. One is studying based on feelings. The other is studying based on actual evidence. That difference compounds over an entire semester. And maybe the most interesting thing about this method is that it doesn't necessarily make studying feel easier at first. Sometimes it makes it feel harder, because now your brain can't hide behind familiarity anymore. But most students say they feel calmer afterward, because the confusion becomes visible and specific instead of just this vague, heavy feeling of not knowing anything. Your brain stops saying, I understand nothing, and starts saying, okay, I understand these parts. These are the exact things I need to go back to. That clarity is what reduces overwhelm. And for most students, overwhelm is the real enemy. Not intelligence, not laziness. Just too much information, too much pressure, and too much uncertainty about whether any of it is actually working. The 3-2-1 method doesn't remove all of that, but it gives you something that most study methods don't: actual evidence of what your brain can retrieve on its own. And in a system built entirely around retrieval, that evidence is worth more than any amount of time spent just reading the same notes again.